Welcome to the Libertarian Counterpoint. I'm Richard Fields. On the program today, Lee Welter, who is a retired anesthesiologist and a teacher of paramedics at American River College. And also, we have Elaine Lucier, the vice president, I believe it is?
Yes.
Of Young Americans for Liberty at UC Davis. Tell us what's going on with the Young Americans for Liberty in Davis these days.
Well, as just a measure of forewarning, I have to say that I've not been as involved as I have been in the past year or so, since I took on a part-time job as well as being a full-time student. And
good for you.
Thank you. And involved in other campus activities. But I know what we are doing as of late, and so we hope in the next quarter to be able to go to other political societies and start having debates, which is something that we've been long awaiting doing. So probably first up on the docket would be the Democratic Socialist Club. And a lot of that is, of course, because of the upcoming election and some of the momentum that's been building with Bernie Sanders and the support that we've seen from our peers on campus. And so because of that, we're really, really eager to actually sit down and get to talk to them, although I do think I understand a lot of where they may be coming from, but always trying to hash out that reason and logic is healthy competition and debate.
In 2012, college students were all gung-ho for Ron Paul. And 2016, it's not so much Rand Paul, but it's all Bernie Sanders.
Yes.
Were you involved in the movement at all in 2012?
You know, 2012, I was 14.
Still
Yes.
in high school.
Still in high school,
right.
And that was, of course, I didn't have the opportunity to vote, and so it was more hearsay since I wasn't able to be active in the political process. But you know, definitely having had both parents be pretty interested in just the political campaign and the presidential race of 2012. I did see that, and I remember even as early as 2008 that picking up momentum. What I can say, even in the time from high school until now, I think there's been a lot of movement towards almost radicalization on the far kind of left side of things, and those are the people who are really good at espousing certain kinds of propaganda that's very seductive to young college students.
Okay, what kind of propaganda are you referring to?
I mean, I consider propaganda to be you know, promises of free college tuition, or you know, even maternity leave, or support for different movements that hope to transcend different racial boundaries that are perceived, and things of that nature, and in a way that I think kind of wheels and deals to the vanity of a lot of college students, and is a pretty easy pill for them to swallow.
From a libertarian perspective, a lot of these promises, idealistic solutions to whatever our problems might be, sound really great, but people neglect to recognize that they're coming at somebody else's expense. And once they start earning and being responsible for a family,
right,
they realize that it's at their own expense.
Right.
Right. You're an economics major and a German major, which is an interesting combination. And I'm assuming that UC Davis is not normally is not teaching Austrian economics as their standard curriculum.
No, they're not. I can say that while we do probably touch on business cycles and things of different economic topics like that, it's definitely New Keynesian economics as the mainstream standard for all professors. But I have had others who veer away from that, or more classically liberal in terms of what they personally believe, but as I think a department, and the textbooks that we use, which I've said were written, a few of them by Paul Krugman. So
that says a lot right there.
Yes.
I majored in economics as an undergraduate back in the 70s, late 70s. And back then, Keynesian was also reigning supreme, but there was a challenge by the monetarists. The Milton Friedman monetarist school was gaining credence among certain schools, Chicago School and elsewhere. Are the monetarists part of the debate anymore?
I think only in kind of the avenues that I would go seek out myself. So that would be discussions that we might have at our Young Americans for Liberty Club, or things that have just alternative perspectives and viewpoints on economics that veer away from the interventionist kind of statist leaning curriculum that we're definitely taught in the classroom.
Okay, so you're getting pure, unadulterated 1930s style Keynes.
I would say so, yes.
That's interesting. I mean, that's a regression from what was being taught in the 70s and 80s, in a sense.
I can speak on that a little bit, just in terms of the way that I personally experienced, like the lecture structure to build on itself. It always starts out as talking about supply and demand and the merits of the free market, but then there's always the segue into
Market failure, that kind of thing?
Yeah, of course, market failure. And
Don't
then,
forget social justice.
yes, and I think that's something that's incorporated and talked about in the idea of externalities. The idea is that there's always the opposite negative effect that you might have on someone by just personally choosing something that's not good for the collective society, and that you have to pay for that.
I mean, externalities are a real thing. I
Right.
mean, if you build a house that
Yes.
casts a shadow on your neighbor's yard, that's an externality.
Of
that,
course.
There are various theories of how to deal with that.
I think,
But they can be free market theories as opposed to bureaucratic answers.
right, and I think definitely leans towards the bureaucratic intervention.
One of my favorites is R.H. Coase, C-O-A-S-E, or Ronald Henry, who was an economist
Chicago School.
who spent his career as a law professor in the University of Chicago. And he presented a lot of examples, such as addressing this myth that there's things that only government can do. Sorry about the microphone there. I don't want to pound on the table, remind myself. But people say, oh, you can't build it. Who has an interest? Who can pay for the lighthouse? We said the earliest lighthouses were private. They were paid for. If anybody wanted to use the harbor, they had to make a contribution that went to pay for the lighthouse, that accounted for their safety and their guidance, and everybody was happy with that. You didn't need to put it on everybody else's back. It was paid for by the people who got benefit from it.
And we see that as a public university, that I think maybe to its credit, but a lot more so to its discredit, and a lot of the controversy that we've been facing from an administrative level, just with the kind of bloated bureaucratic processes that we've allowed to exist in the UC system as a whole, but specifically in the UC Davis campus. And there are now there's significant backlash against Linda Katehi, who's our chancellor, and you have protesters, students who are vandalizing property on campus with the message, that they want her gone. And I personally can see why.
Well, she's been kind of double dipping, to
Yes,
say the least.
yes, she has been double dipping. I think she is she's an apologist in a lot of different ways for the other side, so to say, and trying to appease all different groups on campus, but
You can't please everybody.
You can't please everyone.
I sort of have to pity somebody in that
Right.
position, because no matter what they do, somebody's going to criticize them for it.
And I think she's been towing, she and Adela De La Torre, who's our vice chancellor, who deals a lot more with the different student affairs. When student groups have complaints, they go to her, or she's kind of the face of that, those causes when students come and demand that there's different service centers built for their particular needs, or that I've even heard in some cases petitioning for student judicial affairs kind of bylaws to be relaxed for certain groups of people because of certain special cases that they may fall into, and that wouldn't be able to apply to the general student body.
There's a lot of talk among students that the cost of an education is extremely high, and it is. I mean, I remember going to a public university, University of Minnesota and Wisconsin back in the 1970s, when I would pay approximately $150 in tuition
Right.
per quarter. $150, and even adjusted for inflation, is you know, an amount that I could easily make working my way through school, which I did. Not so easy anymore. Even in inflation-adjusted terms, it's, you know, it's very, very difficult to pay the cost of an education. And I'm not convinced that the quality of education has changed materially at all, particularly in the non-technical sciences. And the only thing that I can think that would make that change is the fact that we have a huge amount of college loans available, a huge amount of scholarships available, a huge amount of subsidization from the federal government to colleges, all kinds of things going on to make it a whole lot easier to get into college, but at a higher price, primarily through taking on a lot of debt. And that instead of increasing the student to faculty ratio, or improving the quality of education, what's really happened is that the administration of colleges has been beefed up tremendously at the expense of the faculty. Is that an accurate assessment?
I would say that definitely the availability of student loans factors into that quite a lot. I think something that I've thought about quite a lot is the idea that, yes, it's a public institution, but it's not public serving in any sense of the form, in that when there is money available, it doesn't go towards the kinds of quality assurance that you might be able to have at a purely academic level. It does go to a lot of the UC regents and to administrators whose jobs are really difficult to defend, I think, if there weren't all these kinds of programs that they're constantly trying to implement. And I think it speaks to what Lee said earlier, is that on a student level, when there are people who ask for programs that help keep, just kind of retainment rates for different groups of people on campus who maybe are from lower socioeconomic, they do end up hurting themselves or hurting their fellow peers, because, of course, as you said, you don't realize how that does come back to you. It falls on the shoulders of students to pay for it and for their families to pay for it, and there's the abundance of student loans, which also goes into that.
But there is a favorable trend, at least in my view, and that's largely in the community colleges, which in California are the biggest bargain for students, and many of which are working to support a small family and pay their way. It's a career in technical education. I tell my paramedic students, nobody's going to outsource your job. You have to be here on the spot. And there are other opportunities. Welders, there's a shortage of welding talent in the country. So somebody spends 2 years and gets qualified to do that, they're guaranteed a pretty well-paying job from the very start.
You might be able to do welding with a robot, but not paramedics very easily.
But that is true, and beyond that, there is a need for people with the knowledge and skills, the capability of supervising the robots. Somebody's
supervise the robots, yes.
Exactly, and setting them up, and that's a very technical job.
Hal doesn't need supervision.
Oh, does Hal needs more supervision than I think you care to admit.
Don't tell Hal that. Back to the switch that I have observed from a libertarian, sensible Ron Paul supporters to socialist Bernie Sanders supporters among millennials and college-age students. I'm wondering if that's partly an artifact of the fact that the economy is a lot more bleak now than it was 4 years ago in terms of people's optimism, people's ability to see that first job actually on the horizon.
I think that may factor into it, but I think where that would be a very sensible answer to that question. I unfortunately don't have the even that kind of that positivity that it's rooted in that. I see it. Why I think millennials or college-age people seem to have such fervent support for Bernie Sanders is really rooted in just very debased or completely lacking understanding of both basic economics and personal responsibility.
So it's a something for nothing.
Absolutely.
Free lunch, okay.
Yes.
Well, and that's understandable. I mean, if you're not a liberal when you're 20, you have no heart. If you're not a conservative by the time you're 30, or a libertarian, you have no brain.
In that regard.
The other thing that I think that's interesting about this is that the whole Ron Paul effort was at a time when we were very deeply mired in the Iraq War, and the anti-war sentiment, which Ron Paul expressed very nicely, was preeminent. And to his credit, Bernie Sanders, I think, is following, to a certain extent anyway, the anti-war sentiment that Ron Paul engendered. But when it comes to economics, they're diametrically opposed. But I'm thinking that people your age don't really have any world experience with the old Soviet Union, or with the breakdown of
Some of the most rabid libertarians or liberty-minded people are those who have come from the communist countries, escaped North Korea, got out of China.
Yeah, who's that chess champion from Russia? That
Gary Kasparov,
yeah, Gary Kasparov,
right?
who is saying,
They know what it's like.
talk to me about socialism. I've been there. I fled
Right.
from it. I ran from it as fast as I could. Don't talk to me, Bernie Sanders. You have
Right.
no idea what you're talking about. And he doesn't. He really doesn't have a grasp of what his economic nostrums would actually accomplish. All you have to do is take a look at the Ortega Maduro Venezuela, or the Peronists that ran Argentina up until recently. Then you get an understanding, because you're looking at an economy where just this week Venezuela has shut down business for a week.
They want to look like
They
North
shut
Korea.
down business.
Turn off the lights.
They extended the Easter holiday by 3 days in order to save electricity,
And keep
they're-
everybody in the dark.
because they're running
Because
out of
that works
juice.
for
They
them.
can't keep industry and just basic living, basic standards going, because they have so corrupted the free market economy that the supply just isn't there for basic necessities like toilet paper, like tissue, like groceries, like electricity. I mean, it's turned into almost as bad as North Korea, as far as I can tell.
I mean, I can't necessarily speak to all that. I mean, I know growing up and having heard of just the sheer difference in lifestyle. I mean, in terms of quality of life, and having been far removed, of course, from Venezuela, but understanding the luxuries that we have here in the United States because of our free market, and the fact that, I mean, the people of Venezuela do live in squalor for the most part, and are not able to enjoy the luxuries or just the things that are afforded by having a free market economy and the innovation that comes with that.
And the tragedy is that Venezuela and Argentina both are extremely rich in natural resources.
Right.
Oil in Venezuela, farmland in Venezuela, and as well as mineral resources. And if they were run with a free market, as they were up until the Peronists took over in Argentina, and up until the socialists took over in Venezuela, they had prosperous economies, and they would have prosperous economies now had they not descended into socialism, had they not followed the path that Bernie Sanders would take us down.
Right, and I think general kind of obliviousness of the perils and the pitfalls of a socialist government and just kind of collective mindset, I think, is kind of softened. I know college students often point to the Scandinavian countries as being
Which
the
have retreated from socialism.
Right,
in large part.
and in the time that they were, of course, were living off the spoils of a previously capitalist economy.
Not only that, but they're also very homogenous in the sense that they're
A different culture.
The culture is one where almost everybody is pretty much in the same middle class status.
Right.
You don't have, like the United States does, a huge group of immigrants. You don't have a huge group of people who are less skilled, less wealthy than everybody's pretty much the same to start with. And I've always said that socialism works fine at the family level. because we all.
But works fine for the privileged few at the very top.
Well, that too. But at the family level, we operate in a socialist manner. We all take care of the infants and the children.
And we hope that they grow up someday, not
exactly.
too long.
Well, yes, and that's why it works at the familial level. It does not work when it gets beyond family, because at that point people start to be free riders if they have the opportunity.
And I read I think to also speak to that, I read a pretty interesting article recently of an American who he and his wife had gone over to live there and having a kind of a fresh perspective, but also I'm sorry, in Norway.
Oh, okay.
In Norway and or I'm sorry, actually in Denmark. What
Okay.
do I say? And there's always the idea
prototype.
that the Danish are the happiest people, and both he and other Danish citizens who ended up leaving Denmark to go other places have spoken to the idea that the metric that they use to kind of qualify what happiness is and to survey the people of Denmark is really, really flawed, and that whereas it's kind of proxy happiness and very surface level, that individuality is definitely sacrificed for this kind of homogeneity that you
So there's a value of conformism that we don't have here.
And that if you have, if you're someone who does really well in school, or if you have a particular talent, that you may be able to pursue those things very privately, but if you were to talk about them in a social setting, that people would really kind of ostracize you and, make sure that if you're the nail that's sticking out, that you're hammered back into place.
George Ayiti, the native of Ghana, who's an economics professor at George Mason University and president of the Free Africa Foundation, has a very simple way of characterizing this socialism. He says, Africa is poor because she is not free. And if you read any of his books, he goes into great depth as to how this comes about. And it's sort of sad. People fall for they get promised everything, and then reality hits, and it's too late. Somebody has a stranglehold on the government.
I once saw there's an internet meme going around right now that talks about if the population of the world was 100 people, 50 would make one person would make more than $90 a day, and the 99 would make less than $90 per day, and that works out to $23,400 a year. And I'm thinking, well, okay, $23,400 a year, that's not a whole heck of a lot, in our middle class value system. But how do you remedy that? If you're going for a society where the goal is equality, you just say, okay, tax 100% of all earnings over $23,400 and give it to everybody else.
It's almost that bad.
That would accomplish it, except that everybody would stop working at $23,400. Or a lot of people
still have to keep their nose above water. I spoke to a woman once who was from Germany. She was very proud. She says all the free schooling and free medical care, just a wonderful thing. And I then learned that she worked as a housekeeper, cleaning houses. Her tax rate was 70% of her revenue, perhaps because her husband already had income. And then when a family member who had been seriously injured or ill needed rehabilitation, I asked, are you going back to Germany because it's free there? She says, no. She said, we're going to stay here until everybody's fine.
But speaking in theoretical terms, you could cap incomes at $23,000, tax everything above that, and achieve equality, right? Or you could say, okay, we want to have equality of opportunity. We're going to say anybody that wants to cross state lines or national boundaries can do so. No limits on immigration. And that would accomplish the same thing. Everybody would have an equal opportunity to the lifestyle that we have here. We'd have an equal opportunity to compete with folks that are just as hardworking, even though they happen to have been born in Mexico or in North Korea. So that is the fair and just way to achieve equality, and it will result in a lot higher average income than $23,400.
But then we'd have an influx of people who wanted
you don't give them anything.
Sun Microsystems or somebody who wants to start Google and how could we live with luxuries like that? We wouldn't have any luxuries like that.
We've talked about the perils of a Bernie Sanders presidency in terms of social economics. What about the perils of a Trump candidacy? Is he not appealing to the authoritarian in the worst of us? First question. And the second question, related to that, is George Soros and his Democracy Spring basically trying to cause all kinds of trouble for the Trump campaign to make them look even more authoritarian than they are?
I think there are always going to be attempts on between any two parties, or it's kind of, I don't even know if you could call Trump of the Republican Party, since he's just so...
The Republicans don't want anything to do with him.
They don't want anything to do with him, of course, and that he's just so kind of out of nowhere field almost in this election. But
you could count on him always doing the right thing for Donald Trump.
Right, exactly. And I have my own opinions about how I don't think his campaign has started out in a serious way. I think, as you, I mean,
well, he's very entertaining.
He's very entertaining, and I think,
and he appeals to the nativist among people
yes.
who are nativist.
Right, right,
and he appeals to the fear of free trade among people who are afraid that they're going to have to compete with people making 59 cents an hour someplace.
Right.
Those are the two populist legs of his campaign. Everything else is fluff.
I think it's almost more, it knocks out the credibility of George Soros and a lot of the kind of more leftist-leaning groups that they would have to, bait him as much as they do. I mean, he does have profound support, having done very well in the primary elections, but then also that he's having to use violence is never the answer, and trying to bait people, and the fact that they've become violent is a problem, of course, I think as well, that if you can be baited and then, are drawn to violence is a problem, and he does seem to have a kind of a supporter network that is very angerable and inflammatory, but he's inflammatory, so I think that must work for him. I don't know if George Soros is really hurting his campaign by getting the people who already are kind of drawn to that kind of, volatility, if they're seeing that in his supportership.
When I listen to Donald Trump, I think it sounds an awful lot like hope and change to me. It's just maybe different words, but it's the same message, and it brings to mind...
We hope, and we hope for change to America that's great again.
Well, yes. Something like that, exactly. And I was in a workshop once with a political science professor who was very proud. He said, I campaigned for Barack Obama. He said, why do you think so many young people supported him? And I quickly spouted, I said, because they're so gullible. I didn't hear another word.
That's the show.
From
You got the last word. We'll see you again next week, same time. Same place on the Libertarian Counterpoint, on YouTube, on Channel 17 Sacramento, and on cable channels all over the place. Also on the internet, streaming live at noon on Friday, 8 p.m. Thursday, 4 a.m. Saturday.